Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Teams Adoption with Harmony. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You are welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. We'll also make a recording of this webcast available to you within a couple of days. It is my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, David Lavenda, Harmony Chief Product Officer. David has served as an executive in enterprise software, mobile, security, and networking companies. David is an international scholar for the Society for the History of Technology, a founding member of the Humanizing the Digital Workplace Consortium, and a longtime contributor to CMS Wire. Before we start, we'd like to ask you a question. What percentage of your organization's workers use Teams on a daily basis for real-time conversations? We are not using Teams for conversations, 1 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, or 76 to 100%. Okay, let's see the results.
Thanks, Maya. Good day to everybody on the webinar. So looking at the numbers, we're seeing that looks like about 70% of the folks on the call are either not using Teams for conversations or are using it in a very limited fashion, and that pretty much fits in with what we're seeing in the market, and I think that's a good starting point for our discussion today. So, if you've been following the news in the recent weeks or in the last couple months, you couldn't have possibly have missed the burst of stories about how many people are using Teams. Microsoft has been putting out numbers saying using Office 365. They're talking about 200 million users, which is of course an enormous number. And then they're also talking about Teams users, we'll see in just a moment. But just to give you kind of a perspective of how many people are using the tools that we're talking about, we start with this one. Monthly Office 365 users, about 200 million as of November. And that's a tremendous amount. But we're looking at the actual number of the Teams usage as part of the Office 365 set of users. Jared Spataro, one of the CVPs at Microsoft, back in November, said that Teams has more than 20 million daily active users. So out of the 200 million monthly active users of Office 365, 20 million of them are using Teams. So pretty much in line with the poll, we saw that there's a fairly small number of people overall using Teams, and I think one of the adages is that the first group of getting people to initially start using a product is the hardest. So the saying the first 20 million is always the hardest is not really the case, because if we look at in perspective, who typically uses the technology early on. So before we do that, just note that Microsoft has said that Teams is the fastest growing product in Microsoft's history. Even though Teams is not strictly by definition a product, it's really a set of services that accesses other Office 365 services, things like files and conversations, some of the capabilities that were previously in Skype for Business, and so on. So, looking at the actual where we are in the Microsoft in the adoption place of Teams as overall part of the market potential, this is some of you are probably familiar with this Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation curve, or what is often called the technology adoption model. This is kind of a standard way today of looking at how innovation diffuses. It's the way marketers develop go-to-market strategies, looking for how to break into the market. And the model divides up the populace into different groups by their buying or using behavior. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see that there are two groups of people. One is innovators and early adopters. They make up together about 15% of the populace. And the majority of the people, the early and late, what we call mainstream users, that's about 70% of the population. The early adopters, those are the folks who really like technology. They seek out technology to solve problems that they have. They don't need a lot of instruction in terms of how to solve the particular problem. They don't need a lot of training, if any at all. And this pretty much fits into what we've seen in the poll, is that the vast majority, 70%, like we see here, are not using Teams at all, or using it in a very limited fashion. And we saw here that about 11% were using it a lot, and 9% were a little bit less so. So that's pretty much the innovator, early adopter. I think our poll numbers show almost exactly what we're seeing here on the screen, which is that Teams is at about 10% of market penetration of the 20 million Teams users out of the pool of 200 million Office 365 users, leaves us at about 10%, and that puts us squarely in the innovators, early adopters section of the graph. So who are these typical early stage users? Who are the people who are making the most today of Teams? Some classic examples of these people are people who, as I said, they look to technology to solve problems others didn't know they have. And these are kind of people like developers. Oftentimes they're people, this is where Slack initially got its start, selling to developers. Support people are also people like this, or, they're kind of scattered around the organization, but they're often looking for ways to connect and looking for technology to solve some of their problems. And this kind of, and of course, people working on projects, limited projects. It's kind of a defined group, and they're looking for teams or technology to communicate or to solve problems within their group, but not so much outside the group or with other groups. So this is a kind of a classic grassroots usage that by which technology gets adopted by innovators and early users. No rules, no specific goals, just a very novel way to solve an old problem of keeping everyone on the same page. So these today, we believe, are the people who are using Teams in the large numbers, are these early adopters who are working without a lot of organizational guidance. Now, before we go on and talk about some of the problems of adoption and how we bridge that gap from starting with the early adopters and the innovators and moving to the mainstream, one thing we just need to take into account is that all this excitement over Teams, and particularly talking about Teams for conversations. So, Teams is also being used as a replacement for Skype for Business. So a lot of Teams usage is actually the video and unified communications that is really not what we're talking about here specifically. We're looking at the actual teamwork kind of interactions of conversations and being able to collaborate in that fashion. So if we're looking at that in that realm, one thing we must ask, and we certainly can't ignore, is what happened to email. Email has always been the standard way for people to connect with other people and to share messages both inside and outside the organization. We commissioned back in the fall an Office 365 study that was done actually in German-speaking businesses, but I don't think that the results would be any different if we had run this elsewhere. And that is that we found that email is still important to 94%. I mean, it's clear that Teams is not replacing email; it is augmenting email, and therefore, any sort of discussion about adoption of Teams and communication, collaboration within the organization, outside the organization, must take email into account because, on one hand, you have an opportunity to connect with people through Teams and conversations. On the other hand, you have an opportunity to connect with people in email. when you should use each one is not really clear, but we certainly have to give some sort of guidance in order to drive adoption of Teams is what happens to email. So if we just take a quick pause and see where we are in terms of the market acceptance and the market adoption penetration of Teams, we can really make two quick conclusions. One is it's still early days for Teams. We don't really see a lot of mainstream adoption in large numbers, which was borne out by the poll that we had here. I think that's clear that that's what we're seeing in the market generally. And secondly, email is not going away, particularly for use without external parties. Teams is really not a good solution because of all sorts of things like data ownership, the ability to effectively include large numbers of people outside the organization into a Teams group is not really easy to do or even recommended. So now that we know what where we are in the market, let's take a look at what the specific challenges are to overcoming mainstream adoption obstacles. So we know that the early adopter folks like technology, they seek it out. You don't need to tell them too much, they'll just take it and run with it. But if we want to move to the mainstream, we need to take a look at a little bit more of how these folks work, and how to overcome the challenges of getting them to adopt Teams. So obstacle number one, and this is by far the biggest obstacle, is changing people's behavior. Typically you'll hear from mainstream users, I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. I need to focus on work. I don't care about technology. If you try and offer them something new, they will typically underrate the value of what you're offering them and overrate the value of what they currently have, even if their current solution doesn't really work for them. And these are the kind of folks who will say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And getting them to try something new, even if there's a value to it, is not easy. We always say that technology is easy, changing people's behavior is difficult, and this really is by far, in a way, the biggest impediment to getting any new product adopted. And Teams is certainly no exception to that rule. Challenge number two is the disconnected business conversations. People need to continue to communicate with people outside the organization for reasons I said before. When you communicate with people in Teams, all the data resides within your organization. The external party does not really have any access to that data, or vice versa if you're communicating with somebody else's Teams infrastructure. So for governance needs, organizations need to maintain records of their interactions with partners, customers, and suppliers. Companies simply can't rely on Teams for interorganizational communications today. So now you have two potential channels of communication, one with outside people through Outlook and email, and the other one with internal folks or with partners through Teams. And these disconnected discussions actually could be talking about the same thing. You could be talking about a particular project out externally with people with email, and internally with Teams. So it is possible to add external users to Teams. It is not really easy to do so, and really the problem with that is also the data ownership. So an external user can communicate with your team, but if you're communicating, say, with an outside partner and negotiating a contract, when the engagement is finished, all the information of the exchange resides within the one partner's repository, and the other partner really has no access to it. So in a kind of a contractual project, account management type relationship, Teams really today does not offer a solid replacement for email, at least at this point. Obstacle number three is this problem of too many channels. I mean, it's ironic is that the more you use Teams, the more difficult it is to find information. So every time a new group gets together, they form another team. For every subject, they have another channel. I like to think of this as like a bad cable TV package. You end up having 150 channels. Most of them are garbage, and you still can't find the few shows that you actually want to watch. And this is pretty much what is beginning to happen with Teams. Certainly at the early stage of Teams, when people are just grassroots users, are using it without any sort of governance and without any sort of IT direction. It's just the usage is inconsistent. There's no strategy for it, and it tends to be all over the map. So before we actually head over to look at some of the methods and suggestions for how to drive Teams adoption, we're going to take another quick stop here and ask another poll question. So I'm going to turn it back over to Maya for the poll.
Thanks, David. The second question is, does your rollout program for Teams have a defined business goal and an associated training program? Not applicable. We don't have a Teams rollout program. Partially, we have a business goal but not a training program. Partially, we have a training program but no defined business goal. Or yes.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, so looking at the results, over half the people who weighed in said that we don't have a Teams initiative for that. 24% said it's business goal but no training. 14% said a training program with no defined goal. So, looking at it, it's about 40% of the users roughly have some sort of a plan, but not a complete comprehensive plan for introducing it. And again, looking at the over half of the percent that don't have a defined program, we can still another proof point that that the Teams is still in an early phase when it doesn't have the attention of IT, and it's not front and center in terms of a full program. So looking at where we are with this, where we are in the market, let's come up with think of some ideas of how we can drive adoption. Of course, the best way to drive adoption is to address the challenges and the obstacles that we discussed head on. So let's see how we can address each of the three challenges: changing user behavior, connecting email and Teams to have one comprehensive communications modality, and how we can, if not reduce the number of channels, at least make it easy for people to find information across all the different channels. So the first part, overcoming the problem of changing user behavior. The best way to change this is to reduce the amount of behavior that you have to request of people. This is always the key to good technology introduction. People don't like change. There's a whole philosophy around nudge theory that has proven is quite successful to get people to change by making it very easy to make the right decision. So we like to say it's to make the right thing the easy thing, and then people can do that. So I'm going to show an example in a moment of one of the ways that we at Harmony recommend doing that. But examples are leveraging existing technologies like email. Everyone is still using email. How can you use email as a lever? Sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but use email as a lever to get people to use Teams. Use some of the other tools like metadata and search that people are familiar with to bridge the transition to the new technologies like Teams. The second way to overcome obstacles and challenges is to start with well-defined business cases. So here's where IT gets involved. It becomes the Teams initiative becomes a business initiative that has governance. It has well-defined goals. It has a high-value business case. It's something that people care about. It's not just another tool thrown out there for people to figure out what to do. And when people can understand how this tool can help make a difference in their overall business experience, they understand the value and the reason why it may make sense to do that. So several good cases for getting mainstream business users to use Teams are account management and case management. They're similar in that they involve business processes that engage people in different departments and often involve external parties. But the beauty of these cases is that they're well defined. They're they have good boundaries in terms of who participates. And we're going to look at one example in detail in just a moment to see how you can do account management. For example, working with an outside party, a professional services organization, for example, who manages clients and can make use of teams to help manage those processes, those business processes. So let's actually look at that by looking at a sample business case, that one of account management. And I'm just going to tell kind of a brief story about the overall flow of the business process, and then we'll talk a bit about the actual how the technology is used, and then afterwards I'm going to show a demo of how Harmony helps bring this business use case to life using Outlook and Teams and SharePoint, the tools that you've already installed, invested in, and are looking to get value out of going forward. So our business case account management starts with meeting Annie Tucker. Annie Tucker is she provides tax advice to a number of clients. All these businesses work across multiple countries. They have complex tax issues. And Annie and her team provide ongoing support to these clients. So this might be familiar to some kind of support that you provide your customers with. This is just an example, but it really is mirrored by many, many different business processes where you have internal work and then you have communications with external partners, suppliers, or customers. And in our case, Annie, who's providing tax advice to a number of customers, one of her clients is Sam. Sam is a business analyst for a company called Glory. Glory is a manufacturing company that works in many countries, and they're exploring a merger with another company, and they need to get tax advice from Annie to decide not only if it makes sense to proceed with the merger, but how to best structure the deal so that the tax implications are minimized. So Sam and Annie work together. They use a variety of tools. They use Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, and we're going to go through the kind of the flow of how they work together, and then we're going to see how Harmony makes this easy through a quick demo of the actual business process flow. So a typical interaction between Sam and Annie starts with, again, Sam works for Glory, and Glory is interested in a merger. He's got questions about tax. So he sends an email to Annie with attachments. The attachment contains, the email is an explanatory email that describes the business case, and then a series of documents for Annie and her team to look at. These documents are probably things like proposed structure of the deal, maybe background of the company, maybe some tax records from each of the sides, and so on. So Annie receives this email with the attachments, and what she does is she starts an internal discussion with colleagues. So she takes all the documents, she forwards them all to people within her team, and she starts to have this discussion. So this is a natural transition to Teams. She can take those documents and the email, post them to a team channel. So Annie, because she works with many clients, finds it convenient to organize her environment in such that her accounts team is the team, and then she has a channel for every different customer that she works with. So she posts the email and the documents to an accounts team and in the Glory channel, because this is referring to that particular customer, and then the discussion and all the interactions, the deliberations continue from that particular channel onwards. So this goes on for a couple of days, couple of weeks. Eventually, Annie's team formulates a proposal for how to deal with the tax that can be sent back to Sam. So after everyone weighs in and they have deliberations, Annie's team formulates a draft letter. So Annie puts together this email saying she's got a draft letter to Sam, and she sends it back with perhaps some attachments with this particular letter attached to the email. Well, that's might be good, but as business goes on, it's never quite so simple. Sam gets the email and he goes and deliberates internally on his side, and of course there are more questions, more deliberations, more emails back and forth again and again and again, many rounds. Eventually there's no more questions, and Annie can summarize the overall findings and address all the concerns. And then the last stage is where Annie formulates a final opinion letter that she's formed to help Glory decide how best to go forward with the merger. Annie sends the opinion letter to Sam, but note that in this case, because the opinion letter is a document of record, this is something that is going to have to be saved for a number of years because this is something that has legal implications. Annie's going to be sure that this doesn't get thrown out or archived somewhere where she won't be able to find it afterwards. So she's going to want to set a retention policy or apply a retention policy to this email so that it can be found later on in case there's an audit or any sort of litigation that is required to find that communication. Even that's not the end of the story because once the merger goes through, 6 months later, Annie gets another question about merger-related taxes, and she remembers that somewhere in the past she dealt with something similar. She's not quite sure which customer she dealt with, and as this seems very. I think this is a very common problem that you're looking for information about a similar case in the past. So she'll use metadata to be able to find those related emails and documents, and we'll show you exactly how she does that. And that's really kind of the question is, how do you make all this easy? How do you take that business case, which again is a very common case, account management, case management, there's any sort of support organization, professional services, projects in manufacturing companies, government agencies who have to deal with freedom of information issues. These are all very, very similar business processes. And the question is how do you take all that and make it very simple for people so that they don't have to change their user behavior to get it done? And that's where Harmony comes in. So we're introducing the Harmony Smart Assistant. I'll just introduce it briefly here and then show you quickly how we walk through that exact business process that I showed you before or talked about before with Sam and Annie, using the tools you already have, using Teams, SharePoint, and Outlook to be able to fulfill those requirements. So Smart Assistant is a sidebar which exists within email. There are several versions of this. There's a desktop version, which I'll be showing today. There's also a Office web app version, which is an plug-in to Outlook web and also to Office Apps web. And then there's a series of mobile apps that also work on mobile devices and can help with similar type of capabilities, but also things like are specifically tailored to things like working when there's no communication. So things like business continuity and offline capabilities are highlighted in those particular products as well. So I'm just going to switch over quickly to my desktop. And you'll see right here, all of you will be familiar with this. This is my Outlook window. And I'm Annie, and I've got a bunch of emails. And you'll see that, as I described in the business case, I got an email from Sam. And Sam is asking about the tax inquiry. And he indeed did send me a merger plan and the merger structure. And he wants advice about how exactly is he going to be able to structure this deal so that the tax implications are minimized. So I, as Annie, now can take that information. I receive it from outside the company through email, and I want to bring it into a Teams conversation where I can continue that dialogue internally. So what I can simply do is drag the email from the window directly into the sidebar. I'll show you in just a moment. And so I'm going to drag the email into the sidebar. And when I drag it over, you see I have in my accounts team. I have, you see my structure of my teams. I have all the different teams I belong to. And also I have the channels. So I'm going to drag it directly into the Glory channel because that's the channel where Sam works. And because I've done this demo before, it's going to tell me that it already exists there. And I'll just OK that and say it's OK. And I'll OK that as well. And what I'm doing now is uploading the email and the documents directly to the to the Teams channel where the discussion about the merger is taking place. Now, note that Harmony stops me as part of this upload and says, wait a second, there is metadata that has to be supplied in order to help classify this information. This is critical because this makes it really easy for people now to just specify necessary information. I can just select from values and be able to apply these so that later on it'll be easy to find that information. And I'll show you how we do this in just a moment. So we're talking about a merger, and then I click on Save. So we're using SharePoint metadata to be able to classify not only the documents, but also the emails. Now, these emails get stored in one of two places. They're either stored in the SharePoint location of the Teams channel, or they can be stored in the group mailbox for the team. It's up to the user, up to the organization to decide how they want to do that. We support both ways. The documents and attachments get stored, of course, in the SharePoint location associated with the Teams channel. Now when I click Save, the documents and the email get uploaded. You'll see that the wheels are starting to turn, and you'll see I got a button that says Start a Conversation. Now when I click on that button, what Harmony offers me to do is to add a message. What I'm doing now is uploading the email and the attachments directly to the Teams channel discussion. So I have the opportunity to also have a personalized message. So instead of Hi Glory, I'm going to say something like Hi Glory and team. I'd like to share this email and attachments and start a discussion. You can, of course, add the references to people. So you can add, if you want to add somebody specific, I want to add Fred. I can make sure that he gets a notification of this well. And when I do the post, what happens is this will get posted directly to the Teams. And you'll see when I click on the button Continue in Teams, and I can either open this in the browser or I'm going to open it directly in Teams. So when I go to my Teams interface in Glory, you can see here in a moment I will get an update. In the directly update in the discussion as well, right here in the channel. And from here, of course, I have full capabilities of being able. I have access to all the information, but now all the information that is directly included here is here you see. So it says, "Hi, Gloria and team. I'd like to share this email attachments and start a discussion with Fred Neal. I have the email located here. I have the documents located here, and I, of course, can click on those documents and look at them directly from here. They're stored in the SharePoint location for the teams, and I can carry on the entire conversation directly from here. If I go back to the sidebar, you'll also be able to see that looking at the sidebar when I'm back in email, when I want to go back to remember when the discussion is complete with internally, and I want to send that letter back to Sam. I want to be able to do that through email. So if I click on the Glory channel, Harmony opens up another tab and shows me all the both the emails and the documents that are associated with that particular channel. So you see that under accounts, I have Glory is selected, and I can now filter this list. If I'm looking for something related to the merger, I can find those emails quickly. And from looking at, say, a document here that that someone has added as part of the discussion, so that one of the documents is a tax opinion letter draft, and if I right-click on this, I can open the file location. So I can find out where that actually is stored in the SharePoint location associated with the Teams channel. And then when I want to go back to provide Sam with an answer, so I can just reply to Sam in this email, and then I can literally just drag the document from the sidebar into the email and send it either as a attachment to someone like Sam who's outside the organization, or I can send him a link and provide him access to that, or I can simply just drag it in. There's several options of holding down the Alt key or not, so I can send it either as an attachment or as a as a link, and then I can. It's very easy. I just click it and send it, and off I go. So really simple to be able to send information, to get that information out, to be able to share it with people, to connect to emails. And you see, I really have never left my email window, but I've been able to work with Teams. I've been able to work with SharePoint, and people stay in their comfort zone, which is where they always like to be. Now, at the end of the day, remember we said that we want to send that tax opinion letter. Once the final opinion letter is complete, we want to be able to set that as a record. So if I highlight that document here and right-click, you'll see that you also have the ability to apply retention labels directly from this window without having to go anywhere else, and you can literally just apply that retention label to it. So these are all Microsoft capabilities that are highlighted and surfaced through the Harmony sidebar. So all the metadata, the SharePoint locations, everything is really just the surfacing of the capabilities in Microsoft, but making it really easy for people to access and manipulate the data rather than having to go to the browser and kind of toggle between different apps to get that done. And of course, later on, when people want to be able to find information, if I click on an email, say I got from Harmon, you'll see that on the right side of the screen, I will get the screen will update if I pick a different email. Updates can give me a different view of what I'm looking at, and it's context sensitive. So based on what I see here, I can select different emails, be able to do that. So just a very quick summary to wrap up of where we are. We talked about the three challenges. First of all, we talked about where the Microsoft Teams usage patterns are right now. We're still in the early stages with a lot of experimentation and early adopter users, not a lot of defined business processes being applied or IT governance. To make that transition to the mainstream users, we have three major obstacles or challenges to deal with: making it easy for people to use, connecting email and documents in and Teams, as well as dealing with that problem of too many teams, the proliferation of channels across Teams. And what we looked at are the solutions. So we looked at making it easy by bringing Teams and SharePoint both into the email sidebar. We showed it easy in terms of channels, by being able to use filters and make use of the metadata to be able to find information directly in Teams. And we also showed how easy it is to connect emails and Teams by bringing them literally into the same window and being able to make that transition from Outlook to Teams. So the keys to adoption, as we talk about moving from grassroots, a part of that also involves getting IT involved so that there are Teams initiatives that are well defined and have business cases that are high value, minimizing behavioral change. And one thing I didn't talk about really, but is also a key benefit of many of these types of projects, is being able to publicize initial successes. So starting small with a team that is eager to work on this, being able to publicize and show the value, the business value that they achieved, and then taking it on from there to the next group as you move and extend this throughout the organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Maya for the final poll question, and then we'll take some of the questions that came in.
Thanks, David. Before we ask the submitted questions, we have one more question for you. Would you like to be contacted by a Harmony representative? Yes, I'm an existing customer. Yes, I'd like to trial Harmony. Yes, I have some questions, or no thanks. Okay, David, here's the first question for you. We are not planning to go to Office 365 anytime soon. Are you still going to support SharePoint on-prem customers?
Yeah, thanks for that. Absolutely. So what I showed here was Teams adoption, but everything that we saw here also works for SharePoint, both SharePoint Online and SharePoint on premises. We've have many customers who started with us working with SharePoint on premises, and uh, that will continue to work. The drag and drop of emails and documents works. Of course, Teams as an Office 365 application requires being in the cloud, so that capability is not available to on-premises customers, but we continue to support both the traditional on-premises customers as well as the in the cloud customers. Um, I actually see another question that I'll answer before you go to your next question, Maya. Is where can we change the storage location of emails? So this is coming in an upcoming release, which will be released very shortly. It's the release that I'm showing you here. Will be a configurable option that you have where you can decide where to store the emails, where to put them in the SharePoint location or in the channel's email group mailbox. Right now, in the current release that is out, it is emails are stored in the Teams group mailbox, and there is no way to configure that, but that will be available in a number of weeks.
Here's another question. We tried to roll out Teams for teamwork collaboration, and it is basically being used by small pockets of users. What is most important to ensure we make our initiative a success?
Yeah, thanks for that. So, going back again to the basics, really the three things are if you're finding pockets of usage, that's great. Those will typically be the people who are eager and to use that and find their own value in it. First thing I would suggest is to popularize the value they're getting out of it, and to try and map it to a business process. Then take that business process and define it and try to bring it to another group who may not be as eager to use the product out of the gate, but can understand the value that they'll get by using the product.
Thanks, David. One last question. I'm not seeing the Teams tab in my Harmony Enterprise. What I'm doing wrong?
Okay, so there's several things that could be happening here, and we'll have somebody follow up with you specifically. First of all, you need to be using the latest version of the product. Secondly, there is a enablement that needs to be done through the Teams administration, which is documented in the knowledge base. But we'll have somebody follow up directly to describe the steps you need to take to get the Teams tab to appear directly in your Harmony environment.
David, thank you for a great presentation. Thank all of you for joining us today. You will receive an email with a link to view this webinar again within a couple of days. And we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar.